Hello everyone, and welcome back to Afrikaans, where today I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about past tense. So let's start off with a general rule. In our first verb position, we're going to put in our first verb indicator, het. The verb that used to be in our first verb position is going to move to the second verb position and gain the prefix ge. Let's see this in action. So in the present tense, I have a sentence. Ek skryf vandag 'n brief stadig in my kamer om te kommunikeer. I write today a letter slowly in my room to communicate. We notice that skryf is my first verb, and there currently is no second verb. So to change it into the past tense, I add my past tense indicator het, and I move my first verb to the second verb position, adding ge as a prefix. Ek het vandag 'n brief stadig in my kamer geskryf om te kommunikeer. This interacts with other elements of the language in a few ways. So let's take a look at how it interacts with the verb het, meaning to have. Now this can cause some confusion because het is a homonym, one being our past tense indicator, and in this case, it also means to have. So they're going to change in different ways so that we can identify and distinguish them in our sentences. Ek het 'n boek in my hand means I have a book in my hand. Now, in the past tense, I'm going to insert my past tense indicator het, and my verb that used to be in my first verb position is going to move to the second verb position, gain the prefix ge, but also change its form into gehad. Ek het 'n boek in my hand gehad. This is going to become important when we tackle more advanced sentence structures, and these two verbs might end up in the second verb position together, so we want to distinguish between them. You'll also notice that heart, even though it's spelt with a short vowel, is pronounced with a long vowel. Ek het 'n boek in my hand gehad. The second interaction is when we encounter verbs that have past tense forms. These verbs will change into their past tense forms and nothing else will change. We will not add a het into our sentence. We will not add a ge into our sentence, and we are not going to move any verbs. There are a couple of these verbs, for example, or the definitive list is, as changes into was, sal changes into so, kan changes into kon, wil changes into wou, moet into moes, and mag into moch. Is changes into was, I will changes into I would, I can into I could, I want to into I wanted to, I must into I had to. En ek mag, I may, I just want to add a note on moch. Now, typically, first language or native Afrikaans speakers very seldomly use this way of speaking. They tend to still add het as their first verb, place a ge before the verb that used to be in the first verb position, and add a het to their sentence. So instead of saying ek mag dit doen, they would say ek mag dit gedoen het, maintaining the auxiliary verb, adding a ge to their second verb, and putting a het into their verb to position. Now, you can do this either way. Moch is entirely correct, even though it's not widely used, so the choice is yours. So in our first example, ek is in my kamer, which is changing to ek was in my kamer, no het, no ge, no verb movement. And in my second sentence, ek kan dit doen changes into ek kon dit doen, no ge being added to the verb to. Even though that verb to is already there, nothing moves. We do nothing else to our sentence. The third interaction. Some verbs have pre-existing prefixes, so we're not going to add a second prefix ge to that word. A summary of these prefixes: as in ervaar, experience, her as in herken, to recognize, as in verskoon, to excuse, ont as in ontken, to deny something, gesels, as in chat. Be for begin, as in begin. Mis for mishandle, as in mistreat. I just want to quickly add a note to ont. Because Afrikaans is such a phonetic language, our T's and D's sound very similar. So ont and ond are going to be treated the same. So if you have a word that begins with ond, O-N-D, it is also not going to gain a g. Back to our examples. In the present tense, ek gesels elke dag in jou klas. So I can see that verb gesels has a prefix ge. So when I add het into my sentence to indicate that it is past tense, and I move gesels into the second verb position, I'm not adding another ge to it. I'm just keeping the verb the same. Similarly, ek verstaan jou. I add het into my sentence as my past tense indicator, and verstaan, my verb 1, moves to the second verb position, but because it begins with ver, that prefix, it is not going to gain a ge prefix. There is an extension to this rule where if you have a suffix eer, the ge prefix is going to be optional. For example, ek sorteer my penne. We notice the eer is there, it is a suffix. So in my past tense, I'm going to add the het as my past tense indicator, and then I get to choose. Ek het my penne sorteer, or ek het my penne gesorteer. Both of these options are correct, and you can choose whichever one you want. It is quite often omitted by native speakers or first language speakers, but grammatically, both options are correct. In the fourth interaction, double verbs that can be done simultaneously are going to be treated as the same action. So we're only going to add one ge. Ek sit en eet my toebroodjie. I sit and eat my sandwich. Now, we can logically see that these verbs are being done together, and for efficiency's sake, we can just write them together. So in the past tense, I'm going to add my past tense indicator het. Ek het my toebroodjie. Now, sit en eet. They are both in the first verb position, but they are joined by the conjunction and I can move them together. So they are going to be treated as the same action. They're only going to have one ge, and it's going to be placed on the first verb. Gesit en eet. I sat and ate my sandwich. Or if we want to translate that verb cluster together, I sat and eat my sandwich. Now, if we have two verbs that cannot be done simultaneously, they will sometimes be written together to show that they were just done in the same span of time. In my example, ek hardloop en swem tydens die naweek, I run and swim during the weekend, it is quite logical that we ran and we swam during the space of a weekend, but we didn't do them together. So in order to indicate this accurately in the past tense, we're going to treat them as separate verbs. Ek het, adding that het as my past tense indicator, tydens die naweek gehardloop en geswem. Because I'm showing that these two actions happen separately, each of them are going to get their own separate prefix ge. On to the fifth interaction. If the first and second verb position each contain a main verb, that means not an auxiliary verb, then neither will gain a ge prefix when they move to the second verb position. Some teachers will teach that only the following words, probeer, begin, laat, kom, gaan, and then also the verbs that indicate your senses, proe as in to taste, hoor as in to hear, voel as in to feel, etc., that this rule only applies to this list of words. But they are just the most common words, and you're welcome to study these words or come up with a mnemonic to remember these words. But the main rule is that if you have a verb, a main verb, in both your first and your second verb position in your original sentence, and then you change it into your past tense sentence, then neither of them are going to get a ge. So in our example, I'm going to add het into my first verb position. I move laat to the second verb position, and I'm going to leave it there. I write those verbs in the same order that they were initially written in my original sentence. Ek het iemand anders my werk laat doen. I let someone else my work do, or I let someone else do my work. The sixth interaction is to do with verbs that have interactive prepositions. Now, what I mean by this is verbs sometimes interact with prepositions or they mean something different. In my example, ek tel die blikkie op, I pick the can up. The verb tel or pick and the preposition op or up work together to form a unique meaning. So, when my first verb is moved to the second verb position, they're going to become one word, but my verb is also going to get a ge prefix. Ek het, indicating my past tense, die blikkie opgetel. My verb moves to the second verb position, which is after the preposition. They become one word, but my verb now needs to show that it is a past tense verb, opgetel. One word to indicate a single concept, but that single concept is made up of two words, a preposition, a verb, and the verb's prefix. Directly translated into English, I the can up picked. My past tense indicator does not have a direct translation into English, but it is useful to sometimes just think of it as had, even though it doesn't always make sense to translate it directly. My seventh interaction is when tenses are started with time words. We need to still remember that my verb needs to be placed in that second position. In the example, ek skryf vinnig in my book, I write quickly in my book. Sometimes we want to begin our sentence with an adverbial phrase of time. Verlede jaar, meaning last year. Now in English it would be easy to say last year I wrote quickly in my book, but we cannot place our subject after that initial adverbial phrase of time as we do in English. I need to maintain my verb in the second position. Verlede jaar het ek, so het being my first verb, then followed by my subject. Vinnig, my manner, in my book, my place, geskryf, my verb, one that moved to the second verb position, and I added my ge prefix. This can get a little bit complicated. If we have an adverbial phrase of time, that is still logically correct, even if I change the tense. In my example, ek skryf elke dag in my book. Elke dag is my adverbial phrase of time. So if I change the sentence into the past tense, verlede jaar, I change it into last year. Het being added as my first verb, then my subject, then elke dag. Well, last year, I could still have done something every day last year, so it makes sense and it is still logical to keep that adverbial phrase of time in my sentence. Now, you might be asking yourself, should I not move it to the front of my sentence? And I'm going to say maintain the sentence structure as originally it was given to you. So I've got verlede jaar being adverbial phrase of time. That's going to change my tense. Het being my first verb, then my subject. Elke dag being adverbial phrase of time. Then in my book, where I'm being written, then geskryf, a prefix ge, and we're done. Continuing with this idea, sometimes you're going to have an adverbial phrase of time in your sentence that's not logically correct if we change it into the past tense. Ek skryf nou in my book. I write now in my book. Now, if I change this sentence into the past tense, now isn't going to make a lot of sense. So, verlede jaar is the time phrase that I'm now starting with. Het is my past tense indicator. Then I'm going to omit no, because now and last year cannot logically be in the same sentence. Verlede jaar, then my verb het, then my subject, ek, then in my book, my place. My original verb 1, I move to the second verb position, and I add the ge prefix, geskryf. Last year, I wrote in my book. Or directly translated, last year, I, in my book, wrote. Remember that we still need to expand our vocabulary so that we know which words belong where and how they interact with each other. I hope to see you all next time.